All right, Alexander, we have some news coming out of the Russian economy. I guess the big moral of this story is that Russia is paying down its debt in dramatic fashion. This is not going to please the Western powers, which thrive on debt and use debt as a weapon. They don't take kindly to countries that aspire to be debt free, because being in debt usually means that you are at the mercy of the Western institutions. So, Alexander, give us the breakdown as to what's happening with the Russian economy.
Yes, I mean, the first thing to say is that, we've now got lots of economic news coming out of Russia, because this is the month where the Russian statistical boards and the central bank are able to provide us with lots and lots of figures about what was going on in Russia in 2019. Now, we've obviously covered this story several times, but I think it's a good point now to return to it, because we've had to address in earlier programs issues about Russia, the Russian economy being essentially crippled by the sanctions. There was this big report on Bloomberg, which we discussed in an earlier program. And we also had to look at this issue about the ruble, that there were problems with the ruble, and the fact that the ruble fell. And there was also issues about the pension reform, which you may remember we also discussed in an earlier program. Now, can I just preface all this by again saying, that the Russian economy has many, many problems, as all economies do. We're not trying to sugarcoat the picture. But what we now know is that inflation in Russia did increase as it was expected to as a result of a VAT increase at the start of this year, but significantly less than expected. We also know that the Russian government is running a very big budget surplus of 2.7% of GDP, and we also know that it is running a very big balance of payments surplus, around $110 billion, which is a very big amount of money. But as you correctly say, perhaps the biggest story of all is that the Russian government and Russian businesses and companies are rapidly paying off their external debt. It's now fallen to $450 billion, which is less than the reserves, the gold and foreign currency reserves held by the central bank, which are around $470 billion. So that Russia could, in theory, pay all the money it owes in dollars out of its central bank reserves and still have money left over. We're looking at a very strong financial position indeed, with a budget surplus, a trade surplus, a very low debt, which is going lower still, and it is all consistent with a country that feels itself under a great deal of pressure from the West, and which is methodically putting its financial house in order so that it is not weighed down by debt. It cannot be exposed to the kind of financial pressures that we see in countries like Turkey and Argentina and others suffer from, and which will be able to move forward in the 2020s, financing its own development on its own resources without having large amounts of debt to pay.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's what Russia is doing is they're just decoupling from the Western institutions that essentially have many states, including they had Russia as well, in shackles, in financial shackles. And now it seems like that Russia is now finally getting to the point where they could just do whatever they want now. I mean, they can go on their own. And I think a lot of that means going east.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what they're doing because, of course, one of the other things they've done is, of course, they've bought an awful lot of Chinese currency. They're paying down dollars. They're giving up. The central bank is no longer hoarding dollars in its cash reserves. It's buying up gold. Buying gold mainly, I should say, from Russian gold miners. So the money the money that he's spending to buy all this gold stays in Russia. But it's also buying currency from China, with which Russia, by the way, unusually runs a big surplus. So actually, the balance of trade between Russia and China is in Russia's favor. So that is exactly what they're doing. Now, I mean, they've had to accept a price for all of this. We've talked about this before. Growth at around 2% per annum over the last 3 years has not been spectacularly high, though it's been steady. They had a shallow recession in 2015, which they've overcome, but they are decoupling from the West. They've set up their alternative to SWIFT, that's the interbank payment system. They've set up their alternative to Visa and MasterCard, as you know, the debit card payment system. Their own system is called Mir. They've paid off their debt. They're building up their savings. They're bringing down inflation. And they're going to be in a much stronger position going forward from 2020, when economic growth in Russia is predicted to rise and rise very considerably.
If the West, the United States, and the EU had not imposed all the sanctions on Russia, would any of these moves have taken place?
No, that is the important point to understand. I mean, can I say something? I mean, you often hear people say, you know, that the sanctions have had no effect on Russia. They've had a very considerable effect on Russia. If those sanctions had not been imposed in 2014, Russia's debt would not have fallen. It would have increased. We would probably have had higher growth, though nobody can say that with any certainty, but the financial position now would be much weaker.
Is this can Russia serve as a model? Is this the model? Can Russia serve as a model for other countries who are sitting there saying, you know what, I'm checking out of this neoliberal, hotel, this hellhole we've been living in. I'm checking out, and I'm going to follow this model. Or is Russia a very special case?
I think Russia is a bit of a special case because, of course, Russia is self-sufficient. I mean, it produces all the energy it needs, and in fact, it produces more than enough energy for itself. It exports lots. It produces all the food it needs, and it never allowed its debt to get out of control. Also, dare I say it, it's got a very strong government and a very disciplined population and a very disciplined workforce. If you look at a country like Brazil, for example, it's not easy to see the Russian model being repeated and used there. But if you look at some other countries, China being a good case in point, Iran being potentially, possibly another, well, perhaps they can start to learn things from Russia. If you sort out your governance problems and pursue a policy like the Russians have done and stick to it, then, I mean, you can achieve a great deal. And I think also it's important to stress that as the Russians get their act in, get their act in order, get all their problems sorted out, and methodically reorient their economy in this way, it puts them in a much stronger position to offer alternatives to the West, to countries like Turkey and Iran.
What about other countries inside, say, the European Union, or does Russia not have much of an interest in offering any type of alternatives to?
Yes, yeah, no, I think we're going to start seeing that also. I mean, one of the points we've done a recent program about relations between Serbia, for example, and Russia. I think that Serbia is a country which could potentially look at Russia quite closely. Other countries that might do. Hungary has also carried out a very, very sweeping reorganization of its economy since Viktor Orban became president, often using unorthodox economic methods in the way that Russia has. And if the situation in the EU continues to deteriorate, one could start to see this Russian model starting to be more and more attractive. And, Hungary is a possibility. God help us, other East European countries, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, they might be too.
Because you mentioned Hungary, and there's nothing that the Wall Street bankers and the neoliberals hate more than seeing, these nations, pay down their debt and start to become financially sovereign, start to gain some financial sovereignty. And so what they did with Hungary is the minute Orban started to move towards a financial sovereign position, they attacked him and they attacked Hungary with various ways, as they do with Russia. Are the West, are the financial institutions, are the neoliberals, are the bankers, and all the weapons that they have at their disposal, how do you think they're going to retaliate to Russia essentially becoming debt-free and getting out of the neoliberal system that we've been living under for the past 20, 30 years?
Right. If you want to understand why the West or the neoliberals have been ramping up the pressure on Russia to the extent that they have, and why Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, is being demonized to the extent that he is, it is precisely because they sense that in the case of Russia, they're losing control. Because you're absolutely right. A country that owes nothing and which is self-sufficient and which is growing on its own resources and growing successfully on its own resources really has nothing to fear from the West. And that isn't something that these people, these neoliberals, want to see at all, because they can't crash its economy in the way that they could, say, crash the economy of a country like Argentina or Turkey. Or Greece, indeed. Or Greece is a very good example. So, they don't have those levers that they can pull any longer. So, we're probably going to see not just a campaign against Russia, but as Russian economic influence grows, and as I said, as the attractiveness of the Russian model increases, I suspect we're going to see increasing pressure on those countries, and we talked about Hungary being one example, and the Visegrad states, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. We could see increasing pressures on them to prevent them being more attracted to an alignment with Russia. Bear in mind that all the Visegrad states, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, at present have, if not pro-Russian governments, at least governments that are friendly to Russia.
What does this economic freedom, this financial sovereignty mean in general for the people in Russia, for the everyday average person?
I think what it means is economic stability. It means that if their government decides to do something which is perceived to be in Russia's national interests, like intervening in Syria, for example, and defeating violent Islamist terrorists there who might potentially pose a threat to Russia, but doing so in a way that the United States and the Western powers don't like, the United States and the Western powers can't put economic pressure on Russia, which would hurt their living standards in order to force Russia to change course. So I think it gives ordinary Russian people that sense of protection. And of course, it gives them that way an ability to hold their government to account in a way that, say, governments in Greece cannot do, because if a government in Greece goes directly against the dictates of the neoliberal order, we see a massive economic squeeze being imposed on them. So if we go back about 10 years, more than that, to shortly after Vladimir Putin became president of Russia, there was this talk in Russia of making Russia a sovereign democracy. That is to say, a democracy which is sovereign, where the decisions that ordinary Russian people take in elections and which the Russian government takes after elections is based upon Russian national interests. And we're now seeing the fruits of that.
Yeah, and Greece got off. I mean, I don't want to say it to be flippant about it because I lived it in Greece, but Greece got off easy compared to countries like Libya or Syria, which decide to defy the neoliberal order, and there the bombs start to drop.
Well, indeed. I mean, that's the other thing, of course, which is that Russia is militarily speaking, a great power. So, I mean, they can't force themselves on it militarily because, I mean, it is too powerful militarily for that. And they're increasingly not able to force themselves on it economically because it is disconnecting from them. And it is now increasingly in a position to go its own way.
What is next on Putin's financial economic agenda? I mean, okay, he's got this path of paying down the debt and moving in this direction. What else does he need to do now as he finishes up his term?
Yeah, I think in the short term, the immediate term is that, I mean, there have been various tax changes in Russia, which have caused a certain blip in prices at the start of this year. Prices have increased. I think he wants to see, and the government wants to see, prices start to fall again, which they're expected to do after the second part of this year. In the second part of this year, going back below 4% towards 3%. And I think they will achieve that. But going forward beyond that, Putin, as when he was elected president, announced his program, which is, it's important to stress, is not just his program, it's the Russian government's program. And what they're going to do with this newfound, freedom of action that they have financially is that they're going to increase massively spending on infrastructure, which is already very high in Russia. I mean, they're spending, I think, something like $1 trillion on infrastructure. That's roads, railways, airports, ports, all that sort of thing. They want to make Russia a major trading hub between China and the Asian economies and Europe, so that goods move across Russia and across the Russian railway system towards Europe. At the same time, he wants to ramp up spending on those things which the Russians believe will increase economic output even further, like education and healthcare. And there's lots of money going to be put into these sectors. And last but not least, there's a very, very ambitious program to develop Russia's artificial intelligence 5G programs. I mean, we've talked about China being involved in all of this. The Russians are also involved in all of this. And of course, Putin last year made a speech which perhaps should have attracted more attention than it did, in which he said that whoever leads in artificial intelligence is going to lead the world.
Very true. Pay down your debt, invest in healthcare, invest in infrastructure.
And education.
And education. It sounds to me like that's the platform that the United States should also be following. And that's actually some of the platform that that Trump has talked about.
Indeed,
but they're so caught up in all the other junk.
Yes. You're quite right. I mean,
follow through on it, yeah.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Donald Trump has also spoken, and he's absolutely right to speak about it, about building up a U.S. infrastructure, which, by all accounts, is in a pretty poor state. The trouble is, he's simply not able to do these things because the political system in the United States has become so dysfunctional. I mean, we will do a program on the United States. The United States has immense resources and enormous opportunities. It could do all of the things that Russia is doing and many more. It is a much richer country. It is not doing them, not because the American economy is incapable of doing them. It's because the political system in the United States is so fragmented and dysfunctional.
Yeah, they're stuck in identity politics at this moment in time. They're not thinking about building bridges and building ports. That's
Absolutely
that's
not.
exactly
No.
what's happening.
They can't even build a wall. Let's see.
Yeah. There you go. Alexander Mercouris, editor. They could build the wall. They don't let him build the wall.
Well, exactly.
Exactly. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much, guys. If you like this video, click the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. Visit the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt. It helps us out a lot. Donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. The links are in the description box down below. And go to theduran.com. See the articles that Alexander is linking up to every day. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, guys. Take care.